The cast iron was already hot when she cracked the last egg into the skillet. No recipe card, no measuring cup, just butter hissing against black iron and a smell you could never name. Here are 30 comfort foods that once ruled every decade in America, then vanished from the table. Milk toast was the first meal you reached for when the world felt too heavy. Warm bread torn into pieces, soaked in milk that had been heated slow on the stove with a pat of butter and a whisper of cinnamon sugar. By the 1800s, it had earned its place in American kitchens as the thing you made for the sick, the grieving, and the very young. Cookbooks through the 1930s still printed recipes for it, some calling for a thick flour and butter roux stirred into the milk to give it body. Your grandmother never called it a recipe. She called it what you do when somebody needs taking care of. The soft bread dissolved on your tongue, the warm milk settled your stomach, and for a few minutes, everything that was wrong went quiet. Nobody makes milk toast anymore. The women who heated that milk by feel, who carried that bowl to your bedside without being asked, they are gone, and the taste went with them. Before Ritz crackers ever hit a grocery shelf, pioneer families crossing the Great Plains were already making mock apple pie, crushing stale soda crackers into a pie shell, pouring sugar syrup over the top, and baking it until it fooled a tired family. The Saturday Evening Post printed a recipe for cracker pie as early as 1857. But it was Nabisco that turned it into legend, printing the Ritz version on the back of every box around 1934, right when the Depression had made apples a luxury. The trick was cream of tartar. That white powder pulled a fruity, tart note out of nothing, and the lemon juice did the rest. You poured that syrup over broken crackers, sealed the crust, and baked it golden. 3 people at the table would swear they tasted apples. The 4th knew better but kept quiet, because the woman who made it had turned 10 cents worth of crackers into something that held a family together after supper. If you walked into a restaurant anywhere in New York City between 1910 and the 1960s, there was a good chance Welsh rarebit was on the menu. Sharp cheddar melted with ale, a streak of Worcestershire, a hit of dry mustard, all poured thick and bubbling over toasted bread. It appeared on more than 300 menus across the city during that stretch. Hannah Glass printed a version in 1747, and the dish crossed the Atlantic with British immigrants who carried it into American diners and hotel dining rooms. William Randolph Hearst loved it so much he made it himself for guests at midnight, even with an entire kitchen staff on call. You ate it with your hands, the toast bending under the weight of the sauce. By the late 1970s, it had slipped off nearly every menu in America, replaced by the grilled cheese that needed no sauce, no ale, and no skill. She unmolded it onto a plate lined with lettuce leaves, and the whole table went quiet, a shimmering, jiggly red ring of tomato aspic, studded with olives and chopped celery, served cold at ladies' luncheons and church suppers from the 1920s straight through the early 60s. The dish had European roots in medieval meat jellies, but American home cooks made it their own with tomato juice, unflavored gelatin, Worcestershire sauce, and celery salt. Jell-O even released a seasoned tomato flavor in the 1960s to make it easier. Every cookbook between 1920 and 1940 had at least one aspic recipe, and the women who made them took pride in the unmolding. That careful dip in warm water, the slow turn of the wrist, the held breath as the ring slid free. It was presentation as love language. Today, the copper molds sit in antique shops, and the daughters who watched their mothers unmold those perfect rings could not tell you the recipe if you asked. Long before any of those dishes reached a dining room table, something far older was already feeding American households from the soil up. Succotash came from the Narragansett word mzikquatash, boiled corn kernels, and it carried centuries of indigenous wisdom in every pot. Lima beans simmered with corn created a complete protein, a fact that native communities understood long before any nutritionist put a name to it. European settlers learned the combination and carried it through colonial winters, when the two ingredients together sustained a household through months of frozen ground. You cooked it slow with butter and salt, sometimes a little onion, and served it at nearly every supper table from New England to the Deep South through the 1950s. As fresh vegetables became available year-round in supermarkets, nobody needed the combination anymore. The dish that taught settlers how to survive slipped off the American plate without anyone noticing. In the 1940s and 50s, creamed chipped beef on toast fed more American families than almost any other single dish. Dried beef shaved thin, stirred into a thick white sauce of butter, flour, and milk, then poured over toast so hot the bread went soft underneath. Military mess halls served mountains of it during both World Wars, and the soldiers who came home brought the taste with them. The nickname it earned in the barracks cannot be printed here, but every veteran knew it. It cost almost nothing, stretched to feed a crowd, and the leftover sauce kept in the icebox. Some households added hard-boiled eggs or green peas to push it further. That sharp, salty pull of dried beef against creamy sauce once defined Tuesday night in 100,000 kitchens. Now, the dried beef itself has nearly vanished from grocery shelves, and the dish went with it. The sound of that cast-iron skillet being flipped, a dull thud on the counter, a held breath, and then the reveal of golden caramelized pineapple rings with maraschino cherries sitting bright red in each center. Pineapple upside-down cake reached its peak in the 1950s, when canned pineapple became cheap and available on every grocery shelf. You melted butter and brown sugar in the bottom of the skillet, laid the rings down in a careful pattern, tucked a cherry into each hole, and poured the batter over everything. The flip was the moment of truth. Too early, and it stuck. Too late, and the sugar burned black. Your mother's wrist knew the exact second. That cake showed up at potlucks, church fundraisers, and Sunday dinners for 3 solid decades, then quietly stopped appearing in the 1980s, replaced by boxed mixes that did not require cast iron or a steady hand. The day after Christmas or Easter, the ham bone went straight into the biggest pot in the kitchen. Ham and bean soup was not a recipe anyone wrote down. It was a rhythm. You covered the bone with water, added dried navy beans that had been soaking since the night before, threw in an onion and whatever else needed using up, and let it simmer for hours while the house filled with a smell so thick you could almost chew it. The collagen from that bone melted into the broth, turning simple beans into something silky and rich. One ham bone could feed a family for 3 or 4 days, adding cornbread on the side to soak up what was left in the bowl. The holiday meal was the celebration, and the soup was the proof that the celebration kept giving. When families stopped buying whole bone-in hams, that soup lost its starting ingredient, and 100 years of post-holiday tradition went quiet. Nobody called it dinner. Nobody put it on a menu. But in kitchens across the South and Appalachia from the 1920s through the 60s, cornbread crumbled into a glass of cold buttermilk was the meal that ended more days than any roast or casserole ever did. You baked the cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, greased with lard until the edges came out almost black and crisp, and when it cooled enough to handle, you broke it apart with your hands, dropped the pieces into a tall glass, and poured buttermilk over the top. You ate it with a spoon, standing at the counter or sitting on the porch in the dark. The tang of the buttermilk cut through the sweet grit of the cornmeal, and it filled you up enough to sleep. Your grandfather never talked about it. It was just what you ate when the day was done. That glass of cornbread and milk was a conversation between a man and his hunger, and nobody else was invited. During World War II, when meat was rationed and had to be purchased with government-issued tokens, cheese, potato, and onion pie became the answer to the question every mother asked at 4 in the afternoon, "What do I feed them tonight?" Gladys Klein of Burlington, Wisconsin, remembered it decades later, saying the recipe went a long way in feeding a family when the butcher counter was nearly empty. You layered sliced potatoes, thin onion rings, and sharp cheese inside a crust, baked it until the top went golden and the cheese bubbled through the seams. 3 ingredients that sat in every pantry combined into something warm and filling that tasted far better than its cost. The British had been making it for generations, and the recipe crossed the Atlantic with immigrant families who already knew how to stretch cheese into a full meal. When rationing ended and meat flooded back into American kitchens, the pie disappeared almost overnight, not because it stopped tasting good, but because the reason to make it was gone. But if cheese and potatoes kept people alive at home, it was the soup kitchens that kept strangers alive on the streets, and oxtail soup was often what they served. During the Depression, butchers practically gave away oxtails because no paying customer wanted them. Soup kitchen cooks, including the ones running Al Capone's famous kitchen in Chicago, took those discarded bones and simmered them for hours until the collagen turned the broth velvety, the meat falling apart into dark, rich shreds that tasted nothing like the scraps they started as. The marrow dissolved into the liquid, giving a depth of flavor no chicken stock could touch. It was nose-to-tail eating decades before any chef in a white coat claimed the idea. Oxtail soup was proof that the parts nobody wanted could become the best thing in the pot. When the economy recovered, America walked away from oxtails and never looked back. You did not buy dandelion greens. You walked outside and picked them, from the yard, from the park, from the empty lot down the block where nobody cared what you took. Clara Canucciari, who cooked her way through the Depression and later became famous on YouTube in her 90s, said dandelion greens were one of the most reliable foods her family had. Free, nutritious, growing everywhere. Rich in vitamin C and A, plus calcium and potassium. You pulled the roots, tossed the dead leaves, washed the good ones 3 times, and dressed them with whatever fat you had. Bacon drippings if lucky, vinegar and salt if not. The bitter edge of those greens softened when they hit warm fat, and you had a salad that cost nothing. It was the kind of knowledge that separated the hungry from the starving, knowing what grew wild while the grocery shelves sat empty. When the shelves filled back up, Americans started spraying poison on dandelions instead. Depression cake asked for nothing a kitchen could not spare. No eggs, no butter, no milk. You mixed flour, sugar, cocoa powder, vinegar, vanilla, vegetable oil, and water right in the pan, stirred it with a fork, and slid it into the oven. Some called it wacky cake, some called it crazy cake, and during the worst years of the 1930s, most just called it the only cake they could afford. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to make it rise, a trick that turned a handful of pantry staples into something that tasted close enough to chocolate cake to make a child smile on a birthday that had nothing else to offer. When the recipe went viral again during the COVID lockdowns of 2020, bakers treated it like a discovery. It was not. It was a survival tool that your great-grandmother had memorized by heart, baked in the same dented pan every time, and never once written down. When even eggs cost too much and yeast was hard to come by, peanut butter bread held families together one slice at a time. The recipe needed only flour, sugar, baking powder, milk, and peanut butter, which sold for around 10 cents a pound in the 1930s, making it one of the cheapest proteins on any shelf. If you did not have milk, water worked fine. The loaf came out dense and golden, with a rich, nutty flavor that made plain bread feel like a meal. You sliced it thick, spread it with whatever jam the garden had produced that summer, and called it lunch. There was no kneading, no rising time, no waiting. You stirred the batter, poured it into a greased pan, and baked it while the kids did homework at the table. It was fast, it was cheap, and it kept for days wrapped in cloth. When the economy recovered and store-bought bread filled every counter again, nobody reached for the peanut butter loaf. The bread that required nothing vanished the moment everything became available. And then the kitchen shifted from survival into spectacle, from making do into showing off. By the 1970s, the potluck table had turned into a stage, and nothing stole the scene quite like Watergate salad. Pistachio pudding mix, canned crushed pineapple, miniature marshmallows, chopped pecans, and a mountain of whipped topping, folded together into something bright green that nobody could call a salad with a straight face. It showed up at every church supper, every holiday buffet, every neighborhood cookout where the women competed quietly over who brought the best dish. The name came from the scandal, though nobody agreed on why. When Jell-O pudding mix started gathering dust on grocery shelves in the 1990s, Watergate salad went with it. Not because anyone decided to stop making it, but because the one woman who always brought it stopped coming to potlucks, and nobody else knew her proportions. Open any lunchbox in America between 1970 and 1985, and there was a fair chance you would find olive loaf, that strange pink deli meat studded with bright green olives and pimento pieces that looked like confetti trapped in bologna. It was an American original, a processed blend of pork, beef, and chicken ground together with spices, the olives coated in milk powder before being folded into the mix. Kids either loved it or traded it away at the cafeteria table like contraband, and the arguments over whether it counted as real food or a practical joke never quite settled. Your father ate it on white bread with yellow mustard and never questioned what was in it. By the 1990s, when America started reading ingredient labels and frowning at processed meat, olive loaf quietly disappeared from the deli counter. The slicing machines that once cut it fresh every morning moved on to turkey breast and roast beef, and a whole generation of lunchbox debates ended without a winner. In the earliest years of American democracy, you did not just vote, you ate. Election cake was baked by the women of the town and brought to the polling place, a dense, dark loaf heavy with molasses, warm spices, raisins, and sometimes a splash of rum or brandy. The recipe traced back to colonial New England, where the cake served as both celebration and civic ritual. You cast your ballot, and you ate a slice while you waited for the results. Hartford, Connecticut, was famous for its version, and early American cookbooks from Amelia Simmons onward included recipes. The cake was yeasted, not quick risen, which meant someone had started the dough the night before, working the butter into the flour by hand in a cold kitchen. As polling moved indoors and voting became faster, the cake lost its stage. Democracy kept going. The cake did not. Alongside the railroad tracks in the 1920s and 30s, in camps where men who had lost everything built fires out of scrap wood, mulligan stew fed whoever showed up. You brought what you had, a potato, a carrot, a handful of cabbage, maybe a bone with some meat still clinging to it, and you threw it into the communal pot. The rule was simple: you eat, you contribute. Some versions used loose-leaf tobacco squeezed from cigarette ends as seasoning because salt and pepper were luxuries nobody carried. The stew tasted different every night depending on who walked into camp and what they carried in their pockets. It was not a recipe. It was an agreement that strangers would pool what little they had and nobody would go to sleep empty. When the camps cleared and the men found work or moved on, mulligan stew had no kitchen to return to. It belonged to the fire, and when the fire went out, it was gone. The fondue pot sat in the center of the table like a small altar, and everyone gathered around it with long forks and torn bread, dipping and pulling and laughing when the cheese stretched too far and snapped. Fondue arrived in America at the 1964 World's Fair in New York, served at the Swiss Pavilion, and by the early 70s, Swiss cheesemakers had launched a full marketing campaign to sell it stateside. Actors dressed for the ski slopes, dipping into bubbling pots of Gruyere and Emmenthal melted with white wine and a touch of Kirsch. Kitchenware stores sold fondue party kits with matching forks, and for a few years, no dinner party was complete without one. The mess was part of the charm. Cheese dripping onto the tablecloth, the argument over who double-dipped, the burnt fingers nobody complained about. By the end of the decade, the pots had been shoved to the back of the cabinet. The party was over, and nobody threw another one. If fondue was the dinner party of the comfortable, Hoover stew was the dinner party of the desperate, and it fed far more people. Named after President Herbert Hoover, who took office right before the crash of 1929, this was macaroni boiled with canned tomatoes, sliced hot dogs, and whatever canned vegetables the pantry still held. The Household Searchlight recipe book from 1931 printed versions of it alongside other budget meals designed to keep a family alive on pennies. You did not choose Hoover stew. It chose you, appearing on the table when every other option had been exhausted. It filled the stomach without pretending to be anything elegant, and the name carried a bitterness that had nothing to do with the taste. The families who ate it in shanty towns and cramped apartments never made it again once they could afford not to. Some foods you leave behind on purpose. Every Wednesday or Thursday, or whatever night your household had assigned to it, liver and onions appeared on the table, and the argument started before the plate was set down. Beef or calf liver sliced thin, dredged in seasoned flour, pan-fried in butter until the edges crisped, then buried under a pile of sweet caramelized onions that were supposed to make the whole thing easier to swallow. During the Depression and through the war years, it was one of the cheapest sources of iron and protein a family could buy. Your grandmother served it because it was good for you, and she did not particularly care whether you liked it. The kids who pushed it around their plates and hid pieces in their napkins grew up and never cooked it for their own families. Liver and onions did not fade because the recipe was lost. It faded because the generation that endured it made a quiet, collective decision to never serve it again. Beans and Franks had its own national holiday, July 13th, and for decades, that felt about right for a dish that showed up so often it practically lived at the American table. Baked beans traced back to the Civil War when canned versions fed Union soldiers in the field. Sometime around the 1890s, someone added chopped sausages, and by the 1980s, the combination was sold pre-made in cans on every grocery aisle in the country. You heated it on the stove in 10 minutes, served it with cornbread or white bread, and called it done. Kids ate it without complaint, which alone made it a miracle. The can opener was the only skill required, and the taste, sweet, smoky, salty, with the snap of a hot dog in every other bite, was so familiar it barely registered as a meal anymore. When health reports started questioning what was actually inside a hot dog, the whole dish took the hit. The cans are still on the shelf, but the hands that used to reach for them have moved on. It had no chicken in it, not a shred, not a bone, not even the memory of one. Mock chicken was scrambled eggs cooked with fried tomato, onion, and butter, served cold on a slice of bread, and during the 1930s, families ate it and called it supper. The name came from hope more than flavor. You wanted chicken, you could not afford chicken, so you made something and gave it the name of the thing you missed. Eggs were cheaper than poultry, and the women who kept backyard hens held onto those birds for laying, not slaughtering. You scrambled the eggs with the tomato until the colors bled together, let it cool on the counter, then spread it across bread like a sandwich filling. Nobody pretended it tasted like chicken, but calling it that made the plate feel less empty, and in a kitchen where naming things mattered, that was enough. In the 1950s, when the backyard grill was still new and the suburbs were still a promise, barbecued bologna was the cookout secret that nobody talked about in polite company. You went to the butcher and asked for a 3-pound loaf of unsliced bologna, a request that would get you a strange look today, scored the outside in a crosshatch pattern, slathered it in barbecue sauce, and set it over the coals until the edges curled and blackened, and the whole thing smelled like a smoky, salty, guilty pleasure. The Smithsonian's Product Cookbooks collection holds recipes from that era calling for bologna as an affordable stand-in for the steaks and roasts that most post-war families could not yet afford every weekend. It was the blue-collar answer to the backyard dream. You had the grill, you had the neighbors, and you had 3 pounds of processed meat that tasted better than it had any right to. But long before anyone fired up a grill for show, there were kitchens where the only thing between a family and hunger was whatever the icebox still held. Cold milk soup was milk poured into a bowl with sliced bananas and sugar, served on a hot summer day when cooking was impossible and groceries had run out. In Amish households across Pennsylvania and the Midwest, it appeared regularly, not as a treat, but as the last line of defense before an empty table. You did not heat it, you did not season it, you just poured and ate it cold and quiet while the heat pressed against the windows. The sweetness of the banana against the plain milk was all the flavor there was, and it was enough to get a child through the afternoon. There was no pride in cold milk soup. There was only the fact that someone still put a bowl in front of you, and that meant someone still cared enough to try. In rural kitchens from the 1930s through the 50s, a single rabbit could stretch across 3 nights if you knew what you were doing. The first night, you roasted it whole. The second night, you pulled the remaining meat from the bones, dropped it into a pot with water, root vegetables, and salt, and simmered it into a stew. The third night, you boiled dumplings in whatever broth was left, sometimes cornmeal dumplings when wheat flour had run out, each one dropped by spoon into the bubbling liquid and cooked with the lid on tight. You never lifted the lid. That was the rule. The steam did the work, and opening the pot let the heat escape and turn the dumplings flat. The women who made that one rabbit last 3 days did not call it clever. They called it Tuesday. And when those women were gone, the knowledge of how to stretch a single animal across a week went with them, because nobody wrote it down and nobody thought to ask. The story goes that a southern baker reached for cream of tartar and grabbed baking soda instead, and what came out of the pan was not what she planned. It was better. Peanut brittle was the accident that became a tradition, a sheet of caramelized sugar and roasted peanuts cracked into jagged pieces and passed around at holidays, church bazaars, and county fairs from the late 1800s through the 1970s. Making it right meant knowing the temperature by sight. You watched the sugar darken from pale gold to deep amber, and if you looked away for 10 seconds, it burned. There was no candy thermometer in most of those kitchens. There was just a woman standing over a hot stove, stirring without stopping, who had learned by watching her mother do the same thing every December. The brittle shattered clean when it was right, a sharp crack that meant the sugar had set. Nobody teaches that sound anymore. It contained no egg and no cream, just Fox's You Bet chocolate syrup, cold whole milk, and a hard blast of seltzer from one of those heavy chrome dispensers that sat behind every soda fountain counter in Brooklyn. The egg cream was invented sometime around the turn of the 20th century in the Jewish delis and candy stores of New York's Lower East Side, and by the 1940s, you could not walk 3 blocks in Brooklyn without finding one. The trick was the pour. You added the syrup first, then the milk, then shot the seltzer in hard enough to raise a thick, foamy white head that looked like a milkshake but weighed almost nothing. You drank it standing at the counter fast before the foam collapsed. It cost a nickel, then a dime, and it tasted like childhood and sidewalk heat and the hiss of carbonation in a glass that was never big enough. The soda fountains closed, the candy stores shuttered, and the egg cream retreated into a handful of old Brooklyn spots where the men behind the counter still remember the pour. The syrup was so dark it looked almost black. Sorghum, pressed from the stalks at small mills that dotted the rural South and Midwest from the 1920s through the 50s, poured slow and thick over a split biscuit while the kitchen was still cold from the night. Sorghum syrup had a taste that was nothing like molasses and nothing like honey, somewhere between the two, with a faintly bitter edge that only deepened as the jar sat on the shelf. You split the biscuit with your hands, never a knife, laid it open on the plate, and let the sorghum pool in the center before it soaked through. It was breakfast in the dark hours before fieldwork, and it was the last thing a child tasted before bed when supper had been thin. The mills closed one by one as people turned to store-bought syrup that poured faster and tasted sweeter. What they gained in convenience, they lost in that dark, slow sweetness that came from a place they would never visit again. When the fruit was gone and the pantry held nothing but the basics, there was still vinegar pie, a custard made from apple cider vinegar, sugar, eggs, butter, and a little flour, poured into a crust and baked until it set golden and trembling. Pioneer families made it when apples were out of season and lemons cost more than a day's wage, and the recipe survived through the Depression because the ingredients were the last things to disappear from any shelf. The vinegar gave it a tartness that tricked the tongue into thinking it tasted like fruit, and the custard was so smooth it barely needed chewing. It was the final act of a kitchen that refused to give up. You had nothing, so you made something beautiful out of nothing, and you set it on the table as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The women who baked vinegar pie did not think of themselves as resourceful. They just fed their families, and when the last of them stopped baking, the pie stopped existing. Not because the recipe was complicated, but because the hands that made it simple are no longer here. Southern skillet cornbread has been a beloved memento of the South for many decades to the rest of the nation, but in the area, it is a tradition that goes back all the way to the 18th century. History books tell us that it comes from Native American cuisine, and it makes sense since a lot of Native American cuisine was very cost-effective. It is kind of everything you would want in a home-cooked meal, easy on the wallet, simple ingredients you can find at any nearby store, and little prep time, which means you can get your cravings fulfilled immediately. Plus, Most cooks back then were so accustomed to it from a lifetime of making cornbread in these cast iron skillets that they could make it much faster than even an experienced cook. Guess experience counts for something, especially when you have 40 to 50 years of it, right? Let's skip forward 30 years from the 1920s to the 1950s, where tomato aspic was the reigning comfort dish. For this to make sense, you might need a little bit of history first, because your first thought will be, well, gelatin is not that good. Set your imagination to a post-World War II America where convenience foods were creeping up in popularity. Now, put yourself in the shoes of most people who wanted packaged food that was easy to make or buy and put a smile on your face. Enter tomato aspic. It is the answer every American did not know they needed. Tomato aspic was a flavorful gelatin dish that made eating tomatoes exciting, so it is really no wonder why people were fond of the item. Despite being a memory now, we are sure your grandparents will remember seeing this at stores. Moving on, we have ham delights. This one tastes even better than it looks. These bite-sized sandwiches were a 1970s party staple, made with soft rolls, ham, Swiss cheese, and a flavorful poppy seed butter glaze. The rolls were typically brushed with the butter mixture and baked until the cheese melted, creating a gooey, savory treat. The combination of the sweet rolls, salty ham, and tangy cheese was a match made in heaven. Now, it wasn't the healthiest snack on the table, but trust me, resisting this bad boy wasn't an option. Ham delights were often served warm, making them a comforting and satisfying snack. With the advent of pre-sliced deli meats and ready-made rolls, ham delights offered a quick and easy way to serve guests something tasty without spending hours in the kitchen. They've somewhat faded from the party scene, but their delicious simplicity is timeless. So, if you're looking for an easy and tasty appetizer, ham delights are a great choice. Speaking of how different things were in their time due to the economical strife, one thing that got really popular back when your grandparents were still young was sausage gravy and biscuits. This might seem like an outlandish combo to us today, and we admit it takes a bit of getting used to, but the magic is all in the gravy. Biscuits and gravy are already something Americans have been pretty accustomed to eating, especially in the 20th century, but innovation is one of the finer points of the country, and culinary matters are no exception. People eventually found out that using pork sausage crumbles enriched the gravy and made it irresistible, especially if they were smoked. Usually, biscuits like jumbo buttermilk ones make for a great side to the dish, but even the gravy alone was worth eating on its own. One holiday favorite was oyster stew, and we know this might sound a lot more high maintenance than mashed potatoes and some chives, but bear with us. We are not talking about just any watery stew with some half-fresh veggies thrown in. Imagine a thick, rich cream soup with oyster and some basic spices and ingredients like milk and butter. Yeah, you did not have to pull out every stop just to feel like you were sitting at a restaurant. When you were tired and wanted a soup to put some of the youth back in your 20s, oyster stew could be made simply in 20 to 30 minutes and did the job perfectly. People loved the textures as much as the flavors, and it really added to the entire relaxing vibe the stew had going on. Sadly, people look to different broths for their relaxation now as America changed its soup tastes. Crepe Suzette. Yeah, these were just as fancy as they sound. This elegant dish was like the fancy cousin who always steals the show at family gatherings. Thin, delicate crepes drenched in a buttery orange sauce, then flambéed tableside. What's not to savor? From its name alone, you'd guess crepe Suzette is a French delicacy, but this finger food quickly made its way to parties around the globe. Crepe Suzette was the ultimate in sophistication and pizzazz, often making an appearance at upscale restaurants or special celebrations. The flambé technique, where the sauce was set on fire, really set this one apart from all other finger foods on the table. However, this decadent dessert has fallen out of favor, possibly because of the decline in tableside flambé performances. But let's not forget the joy of watching a waiter set your dessert on fire. Now, mashed potatoes and gravy need no introduction or explanation. Everyone and their mother's mother has had it. But did you know how good they were at making it? Receiving this dish from the chefs of generations ago was an entirely different experience in comfort. We do not know what spices they would mix, as each area had its own variations, with some even using mushrooms. Most popular was coriander, thyme, black pepper, and some oregano. The gravy would even put KFC to shame, if we are being completely honest. You just did not feel like eating from the outside when you had such fine dining available at home, and it was the perfect thing to get you back up only our feet from an exhausting day. Speaking of crispy, everybody knows breadcrumbs and meat go together, and nothing proves that like codfish cakes. A nice way to jazz up a home party or a cute snack to bake for your partner? You could really make codfish cake with any white-skinned fish. Adding breadcrumbs, spices, and mashed potatoes into the mix was a set of flavors that was not that flexible. Looking into ancient history such as the 1900s, we can find some pretty early references to crispy cod in cakes. There is your food history fact of the day. Cod made the idea click so good that people went crazy over them. Go out for a stroll in the 1900s, and you could easily find this at any joint around the corner or food stall. A perfect crisp with a tender inner and all the savory flavors you would want in a comfort food. Sadly, as far as fishes go, people are looking for different catches for their meals now. No retro finger food list would be complete without pigs in a blanket. The classic. These delightful snacks featured cocktail sausages wrapped in crescent roll dough and baked until golden brown. Pancake dough was also sometimes used, although this combination is more commonly served like a corn dog and sold as a pancake on a stick. The combination of the soft, buttery pastry and the savory sausage made them a crowd pleaser at parties and family gatherings. Now, this is the United States variant of the iconic appetizer. They are distinct from the British dish of pigs in blankets, where the sausages are instead wrapped in bacon. Pigs in a blanket were often served with mustard or ketchup for dipping, adding an extra layer of flavor. They were simple to make, yet so satisfying, making them a favorite for both kids and adults. While they may not be as trendy as they once were, pigs in a blanket remains a beloved classic that always brings smiles to the table. Shepherd's pie is an American classic for many reasons besides just being the expected main course whenever you were heading on over to your grandparents'. It has the gravy, the meat, and mashed potatoes, which all combine together to make for a pretty comforting meal. The kind of dish that really takes the edge off, you know? Plus, grandmas would usually stick to the traditional recipe of using ground lamb. Differences between various kinds of lamb can make or break a good shepherd's pie, but our elders seem to have it nailed down to instinct. Combine an extremely solid taste with the fact that it was pretty cheap to make, with the most expensive part just being your protein, and you have a dish that can easily stand the test of time. Chicken a la Maryland is a fond memory for many 80s and 90s kids growing up. Perhaps it was so popular that the dish was nationally acclaimed and showed up in just about any cookbook you could find. Maryland chicken was named so because it originated from the humble coast side state. Down in Maryland, you could go across the entire state and not miss this dish on a single menu. Not exactly an innovative combo, but who cares about being unique when you taste this good? Fried chicken with gravy, usually served with mashed potatoes or coleslaw, was the American dream if you did not have a white picket fence to go home to. People adored the extra kick it brought to the crispy fried chicken, which was already at the top. The United States of America and fried chicken have such a beloved friendship, and amidst the experimentation, this stuck more than the others. Though now you can't find it in Maryland so often, it is definitely up there in childhood memories. Next, let's talk about cheese straws. No, not the ones you sip your drink with. Cheese straws were a traditional food of England and the southern United States. These baked strips of cheesy dough were a party favorite. Made from a simple mixture of flour, butter, and cheddar cheese, they were twisted into straw-like shapes and baked to perfection. The result? A crunchy, savory snack that pairs perfectly with a cocktail or a glass of wine. And don't get me started on how easy they were to just grab and go. Cheese straws perfectly combined simplicity with sophistication and were ideal for any get-together, from casual parties to more upscale gatherings. Well, all good things come to an end, and sadly, cheese fingers were abandoned after living their days out in the 70s. If you were going on over to your grandparents for a casual Christmas or Thanksgiving visit, you may have been surprised to find that the dinner table was anything but casual, with delicacies like squash casserole. Creamy, crunchy, and filled with cheddar cheese and crackers, It is an all-time favorite that has been a staple of holidays and birthdays in many households. It was more popular to correctly reflect past tense in the 20th century, which explains why you would usually only find your grandparents making it, and back then, it would be very common to have this at potlucks. Some households still have it at theirs, but the trend has taken a bit of nosedive with the cracker and cheese combo taking a bit of a backseat. That only goes for if you are ordering a squash casserole from a restaurant though, because from the hands of any American granny, it was a dish impossible to resist. Salmon loaf was another dish that went in the same direction as codfish cakes. In today's world where you cannot have any kind of original experience since everything has already been invented and done apparently, salmon loaf was an interesting invention. Back in eras like the 1920s, there was more ground in the food world that was untrodden. People wanted new ideas, and the simple ones, like mixing foods that already work, went to the kitchen first. Among these combos was the salmon loaf. When you think of this, try to imagine a meatloaf replaced with salmon with cracker crumbs on top. A lot of people who thought a meatloaf tasted too gamey found this to be a perfect fit. Like the shoe you just know is right for you at the store, salmon loaf was a hit for many people. Especially in states like Alaska, known for their salmon, it went a bit out of fashion since people wanted to try out salmon in different dishes. Okay, so the beloved party pies. These mini savory pies were a staple at 1970s gatherings, offering a variety of fillings like minced meat, chicken, or even vegetables. Encased in a buttery, flaky crust, party pies were the perfect handheld snack, easy to eat while mingling. This variant of the standard meat pie is considered iconic. It was described by New South Wales Premier Bob Carr in 2003 as Australia's national dish. New Zealanders regard the meat pie as a part of New Zealand cuisine, and it forms part of the New Zealand national identity. They were often served hot, straight from the oven, making them an irresistible treat. Whether you preferred a classic beef pie or a creamy chicken and mushroom, there was a party pie to suit every taste. Today, they've been somewhat overshadowed by other finger foods, but their deliciousness and versatility make them a nostalgic favorite. So, why not whip up a batch and bring a bit of 1970s flair to your next gathering? Speaking of cheddar cheese and nostalgic family meals, we cannot go without mentioning the ever-timeless King Ranch chicken casserole. This is definitely a dish for those people who feel like casseroles without meat or protein of any kind are missing something and do not feel as fulfilling. It would take about an hour to cook, but this did massive numbers in every neighborhood from Detroit to Texas. Especially more so in the South, it was a common practice for families to preserve their King Ranch chicken casserole recipes. The real strength of the dish was that you could use as much of the ingredients as you wanted, letting you double or even triple the dish, an advantage that Southern grandmas would very often use when they were in the mood to dote on their grandkids. Let's dial it down a bit with some potato dumplings, which we are 90% sure you will love at first sight. There might be a few people who disagree because everyone has their opinions, and using potatoes in dumplings is not exactly normal. When the first wave of German Americans who brought along potato dumplings with them, they were an instant success in the States. Don't you just love it when cultural exchanges like this happen and make the world a tastier place to be? Potato dumplings are just your typical dumplings filled inside with potatoes. You will notice that the best ideas on this list are the ones who are simple enough to appeal to everyone. Maybe that is what comfort food should be? At least potato dumplings fit a lot of people's idea of what comfort eating is. It leaves a little tear in your heart to see this vanish from most houses and dumpling places now. Next up is smoked fish dip. Smoked fish, like mullet, was a staple in Florida's coastal communities due to the abundance of fish and the preservation methods available. Smoked fish dip evolved as a way to enjoy this preserved fish in a creamy, flavorful dip, making it a popular choice at Southern gatherings and seafood festivals. This smoky dip was a popular appetizer at parties, especially in coastal regions. Made with smoked fish, cream cheese, and a blend of herbs and spices, it offered a rich and flavorful experience. The dip was usually served with crackers, bread, or vegetable sticks, making it a versatile addition to any spread. The smoky flavor of the fish paired perfectly with the creamy base, creating a dip that was both indulgent and satisfying. While smoked fish dip is still enjoyed in some circles, it's not as common as it once was. However, it remains a delicious throwback to the flavors of the past. Pot roasts have been as much a part of the grand scheme of American culture and cuisine as anything else on this dish, and each area, state, and neighborhood has their own ideas of what one should look like. Were you the kind of kid that grew up on beef chuck roast, potatoes, a beefy broth, and carrots in your roast? Maybe you had boneless chuck roast, olive oil, bay leaves, and stuff like that instead. These are just the few variations you can expect to find when it comes to a good, well-done pot roast. The perfect party snack or a great one to pull out for an incredibly large family dinner with the in-laws and extended family, this is one dish that never fails to pull through, especially when a seasoned cook is behind it. Forget maritime memories and bowls of dumplings or potatoes. Let's talk about stuffed cabbage rolls. Cooking cabbage was something that was not so popular down in the South, but more so on the West Coast. People would take these cooked cabbage leaves and wrap them around every kind of filling you could imagine: ham, chicken, beef, or bacon, and even cheese. Maybe some of you might agree that America does not know when to leave things alone. Usually very popular as a health-friendly dish that also gave you protein and taste, it was really common for houses to make this for an afternoon lunch. Cooking the cabbage gave it an even crispier texture too, so that always helped matters with American taste buds. Unfortunately, it would not have much of a presence except its local one, and eventually even that faded away when people got less green-savvy with their food. First up, we have the cheese and pineapple hedgehogs. Now, if you've never seen one of these, you might be scratching your head. Let's be real, it doesn't look the most appetizing, but it was all the rage back then, especially among little kids. An edible, colorful animal? What's not to love about it? We're talking cubes of cheese and pineapple chunks skewered on toothpicks and arranged in a styrofoam half-sphere to look like a hedgehog. Yes, you heard that right, a hedgehog. This quirky centerpiece was a staple at 1970s parties, adding a touch of whimsy and color to the buffet table. Plus, cheddar cheese and pineapple made it healthier than most snacks on the table, and the toothpicks made it easy to grab and go as you mingled with guests. Sadly, the cheese and pineapple hedgehog doesn't stand a chance against the sophisticated party plates anymore. A lot of the recipes from the times of our parents come from the Depression and from when America was recovering from it, but things like baked ziti is what they would whip up when they had a bit of money in their pocket. Some cooked ziti, ricotta cheese, eggs, and spaghetti sauce meant for an incredibly easy and amazing pasta. If you had the Parmesan to spare, you could also sprinkle it on or add a melted layer as a topping. It did not take too long to make, and it tasted very different from regular pasta or spaghetti and meatballs, which was a recipe favored by moms more than grandmas. The real highlight of the dish is in the shape of the ziti, since they end up being these 25 to 30 centimeter tubes. When they turn into soft pasta, they become great for chewing and work really well with the cheese. Grandmas would always spice it up with some beef or duck here and there, though. If you seriously thought gelatin and tomatoes were controversial, keep your head on for baked pineapple ham. Yup, rings of pineapple stuffed to the max with every inch of ham you could squeeze in, then baked, sometimes with additions like brown sugar. Not really something the appetites of today could appreciate, but in Hawaii and other places in America with a niche love of fruits and meats together, this was the bomb. People drew a big red line at pineapples on pizza, but with ham, they were willing to excuse the crocodile under the bed. Maybe the flavor of ham worked better, or maybe it was the baking. Either way, you could often come into your friend's apartment and find these in the fridge back in the 1920s to 1930s. Comforting times with comforting foods, even if we do not see them today anymore. Basic pimiento cheese, the Southern classic that made its way into the hearts of many during the 70s. This creamy cheese spread was made with shredded cheddar cheese, mayonnaise, and pimientos, giving it a rich, tangy flavor. It was often served as a dip with crackers, spread on sandwiches, or even used as a filling for celery sticks. Basic pimiento cheese has a charming Southern origin, with its roots tracing back to the early 20th century in the United States. The spread became popular as a versatile and inexpensive appetizer or sandwich filling, reflecting the Southern tradition of making the most out of simple ingredients. Its name comes from pimiento, a type of sweet pepper that adds a distinctive flavor and vibrant color to the cheese. Today, pimiento cheese is still enjoyed, but it's not as ubiquitous as it once was. However, its creamy, cheesy goodness remains a nostalgic favorite for many. Here is a dish that you have probably heard of one too many times but never gotten enough of: meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Let's just say that comfort cooking really does not get much higher than this, nor more relaxing. Sitcoms, movies, and comedies across the decades that depict middle-class families always have somebody serving up a killer meatloaf, and it is for good reason. Our generation's parents always grew up eating a hearty meatloaf with a side of perfectly mushy soft potatoes, so it is no wonder that they kept the custom going. Today, mashed potatoes have an 85% popularity rate, which even beats hamburgers and cheeseburgers. You would think that those would be America's top one, but it seems nothing can beat Grand's meatloaf classics. Continuing on our potato express train, we have mashed potatoes with sour cream and chives. Mashed potatoes had one problem that very few things, food or otherwise, in history do have, and that was suffering from success. It was too good, the flavor was too great, and it even looked delicious. Eventually, people started to get a little bored of having the same amazing flavor always and wanted to know what more they could do with it. Thus began a very long rabbit hole of adding random ingredients to mashed potatoes, which was a mixed bag, historically speaking. You had some absolute train wrecks, but among the heap, you would find gold like sour cream and chive mashed potatoes. Something that redefined what it meant to have a lazy Sunday or a movie night. Families adored this simple wonder. What it brought to the table was happiness for like $4.50. As America explored the rabbit hole even deeper, it would leave dishes like this behind, which sucks for us. Collard greens and ham hocks have been a combo that has very faithfully stood the passing of time, and we think it is partly due to all the different takes on it that families keep coming up with. You hear cabbage and your heart does not exactly burst with excitement, but collard greens is another story. Pair it up with smoky ham hocks and you have yourself a meal on a budget like no other. A ham hock itself is a portion of bone with connective tissue and some meat that is covered in fat and skin, and the other name for these is pork knuckles. With some sweet onions, garlic, and chicken broth, this was a recipe that would give any other dish a run for its money, and it was great for your diet too. Gotta make sure your grandkids grow up right and proper after all. Rarely do the States and the United Kingdom get along on matters of food, but Welsh rarebit was an international peace treaty that was beloved by many people. Similar to garlic bread, Welsh rarebit was made out of bread, which has long been a comfort food across Britain and America. The dish lacks meat, but do not be disheartened as the bread is topped with a cheddar cheese sauce made with various sauces and spices that make it taste otherworldly. Things like Worcestershire sauce and ale add a unique flair to this dish, and people could not deny the flavor. Yes, we all know the memes about British food being bland, but you all know how good American cheeses are, right? All treaties break, and this one did too, as it was not something people made much as burgers got more popular. At that point, people just thought, why not get a burger instead? Beef stew is a nostalgic childhood dish nobody can go without. Fresh pearl onions and a broth made out of the beef stock were the tricks to an unbeatable stew that is sorely missed every time you eat one that is not your grandma's. The modern-day beef stew involves an entire list of 10 ingredients for better readability that feels more like an overdone broth mixed with a lot of toppings. But that is because beef stews have gone a bit out of fashion unless you are in the South. This is also because beef stews today are usually made with red wine as a base. But the hearty and vigor-filled ones of your childhood were all about keeping it simple with vegetables and a solid cut of beef. Half pork and half ground beef, Swedish meatballs were all delicious. Meatballs that were made this way tended to be smaller than typical meatballs people were used to. When Americans hear the word, they think of a couple of big fat balls on a pile of spaghetti. Now we know that Swedish meatballs were smaller, but as a result, they had a denser flavor that lasted much longer. Actually, these tiny cluster bombs of flavor were being made out of two kinds of meat. Add an incredibly thick gravy with a potent meatball sauce and a cabinet's worth of spices to the mix. What you had then was a full-blown flavor experience that people could either have as delightful comfort food, if made in a hurry, or an actual exquisite meal. One you could take someone out on a date for or serve to your family happily. Those are now bygone days, unfortunately, as kids today are back to spaghetti and meatballs. There are some baking challenges that only your grandmother is equipped for, and making the pinnacle of brown butter sweet potato pies was one of them. Seriously, even bakeries and fancy eateries have struggled to nail every aspect of a pie, but for most home chefs in the United States, it seems to be just another Tuesday with the oven. You take a flaky pie crust with a velvety potato filling that is usually topped off with whipped cream, but most older cooks preferred maple syrup as that was what they grew up with. Just a bit of dark brown sugar would elevate this dish into the perfect dessert, though it would often steal the show entirely on its own. The thing is built to make your mouth water, and we mean looks-wise too, since the brown and caramel hues of the pie just make it all the more enticing. Have you ever heard of this one before, and would you try it? Apricot glazed chicken is another dish that has just as much versatility as the last one, because you could really customize this dish. Depending on the average 20-something-year-old's mood back then, you had either a simple comfort meal or an "oh wow, you can cook" dish. You know the kind of thing you make for your friends when you really want to show off those kitchen skills? An apricot glaze could be made with simple ingredients like soy sauce and mustard, or use a lot more spices and seasonings to create an explosive coating, one that found a perfect place for itself on top of a golden brown grilled chicken. Ironically, when the pairing first started getting popular, that was when apricots finally found a home for themselves in the diets of American people. Nowadays, production for the fruit has been on a steep decline for the past 20 years, and glazed chicken like this is a thing of the past. Flaky buttermilk biscuits are all well and good if you buy them as a snack at your local mart, but you have not tried a buttermilk biscuit until you get a veteran baker to make these for you. Who better than family? And what family member is more skilled in baking than your trusty grandmother? Well, not all of them cook or bake, but the nation has more than its fair share of grandma's creamy buttermilk recipes floating around the internet and cookbooks from dozens of years ago. Practice always makes perfect, and most home chefs learned that the great secret of an impeccable buttermilk biscuit is to not overmix so that you avoid flat and tough biscuits. These were extremely common as snacks to give to children in the family during holidays and were the perfect pairing for a gift basket. Veal piccata makes the two dishes before look like roadside diner dishes because this really is a complex dish, even if you make a bare-bones version of it. So you have to think, what's this doing on a top 20 comfort foods list? We say, great comfort can often be found after just a little bit of effort, and veal piccata proves the point. Thin slices of veal sautéed in a reduction in a simple white lemon sauce. If you were really feeling like a Michelin star chef on their week off, you would throw in some capers. It might have taken an hour or more, yes, but the taste was unmatched. The best part was that it used little amounts of meat to provide a restaurant experience at home. You can see why this became a comfort food now, we hope. What we cannot see, on the other hand, is why this went out of style, but nowadays it is not popular to make. A recipe that is largely forgotten right now but still made some noise back when it was really popular in the 20th century is shrimp and grits. The secret to an incredible plate of these was all in the milk, butter, and cheddar cheese. Depending on the quality and how you handled it, you would ever have shrimp that had not really absorbed the flavor or the best seafood experience you could hope to have at home. Luckily, over many long years, the home cooks of our nation perfected the recipe and kept passing it down, one generation to the next. Some chopped bacon for a smoky flavor, or sausage drippings were also really popular picks for older chefs to run with. Grits would be made with dent corn and often boiled, then mixed with the butter and milk. How did your family make these, if they ever did? We have been talking about main dishes for a while now, so let's take a look at creamed onions, which many argued was the perfect side dish. Creamed onions are another thing we can thank our British neighbors for, because when more of them started coming over, this dish found a welcome place in American cuisine. As things pass on to different places, they change themselves too, and creamed onions would be spiced up in many ways to fit the American palate. Mashed potatoes or mushrooms, for example, were a pretty hot choice for a plate of these. A staple of Thanksgiving eating for many years, creamed onions were really a better time in America because it was new. Maybe that made it even comforting or addictive to eat? At the time it got popular in the 60s, it was a pretty bland period in the kitchen for many Americans too. Twice cooked potatoes are firmly a thing of the past now, but that does not mean this video cannot serve as your inspiration to bring back this hit, which was especially popular with grandmas all around the country. Like we said with the previous dish, something being good for your health and tasty does wonders for its appeal, and grannies knows how to get the best of both worlds. Double cooking always had a benefit because it made them a lot easier to digest and increased their starch. They would prick the potatoes, cook, cool, then cook again before topping it off with green onions and bacon. An incredibly American idea, but also an extremely flavorful one, so do not hesitate to give this one a go. Those kitchens went quiet and the recipes followed. Tell us the dish your family lost and subscribe so the next one finds you.